same-sex parent. So basically, the if you can't beat them, join them sentiment, but they start to recognize, like, yeah, as a little boy, dad's pretty cool, or as a little girl, mom's pretty cool. So through this process of identification, big vocab word, their superego gains some strength, incorporating the parents' values along the way. Then we got the fourth stage of latent. There's that word again. This is 5 to 12. This is where they're suppressing their sexual interests. And think of 5 to 12, that's elementary school into middle school, and they play mostly with the same-sex peers. This is the cooties stage. And then if you're a boy, girls have cooties. If you're a girl, no. If you're a boy, girls have cooties. If you're a girl, boys have cooties, whatever. So you play with the same-sex friends, and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't play with them. And then you move on to the genital stage, which is 12 and up, around puberty and up. And this is where you enter the stage of adult sexuality. So you're expressing your sexual feelings toward others. Now, fixation is a vocab term for when a traumatic event occurs. And traumatic doesn't have to mean overly traumatic like abuse, although it does include that. It could be more minor. One can become stuck in a particular stage of psychosexual development. So for instance, if a child becomes fixated in the oral stage, they seek excessive oral contact through things like smoking, drinking, or eating, or chewing on their hair, chewing on their pencil. Dependence, either passive or biting, sarcasm, and they act tough, right? So through other like personality behaviors, not just fixations. So, and then there's the anal fixation, where you could be anal retentive or anal expulsive. So anal retentive being a controlling and orderly. A lot of people call this OCD, which is completely incorrect, but you know what they mean. Anal expulsive being messy and disorganized, the opposite. So either of those spectrum extremes would be an anal fixation. Then we got the defense mechanisms. So Freud said that when our id and our superego are at odds and very much butting heads, our ego has to essentially compensate. It uses these defense mechanisms to cope with those anxiety-ridden or anxiety-causing events. So methods used by the ego to unconsciously protect itself against the anxiety caused by a conflict between the id's demands and the superego's constraints. They're only unhealthy when they cause self-defeating behavior and emotional problems. In fact, a lot of these can be rather healthy, like rationalization, until they become self-defeating, like when you rationalize a really bad habit. Repression is the biggest one, and it happens with a lot of the other defense mechanisms. So we avoid painful thoughts by forcing them into the back of our mind. This underlies, like I said, all of the other defense mechanisms, and that we are repressing in some fashion in all of the defense mechanisms. An example would be a person who witnesses a murder and they don't remember the details when they're asked by the police because their conscious mind, their ego, can't deal with that trauma. Regression, so repression is pressing it into the back of your mind, into your unconscious. Regression is when your behavior regresses in time. We retreat to behaving or thinking like a child in order to avoid adult issues. So throwing a temper tantrum when you don't get what you want, even as an adult. Displacement is when you divert sexual or aggressive impulses to a more acceptable person or object. This is the innocent bystander one. So an example being your anger at your mom because she took away your phone. So you take out that anger on the family dog by yelling at him, or please don't kick him, but something like that. Projection is when you project, right? Projectiles, when an object flies through the air and lands on something else. So when you project your feelings onto someone else. So you disguise threatening impulses by attributing them to others. So it's how you truly feel, but you're projecting them and saying that someone else feels that way. An example being that you would really want to break up with your boyfriend or girlfriend, but you accuse him of wanting to do that. Sublimation, think like substitute. We expend energy on socially acceptable or pro-social activities in order to avoid undesirable activities. So an example, you like to hit things, that's not socially acceptable. So you take up boxing as a hobby. Reaction formation is when you form your reaction to be the opposite of what it truly is. So you have these unacceptable impulses, so you make them into their opposite, acceptable form. So you really don't like your psychology teacher, but you instead say, oh, you're my favorite teacher, and talk about how much you love Mrs. Rice. Rationalization, what I would argue is probably the most common one. We try to create logical explanations for our behavior in order to justify it. An example being, you want to go to the movies with friends, so you justify going instead of studying for your exam by stating that you would have failed the exam anyway, so what's the point in studying now? Denial, pretty self-explanatory. We refuse to perceive reality in order to protect ourselves from it. So an example being, you get the rejection letter from the college of your choice, but still tell everyone that you're going there or that you haven't received the letter yet.